Hey there, this is TJ Starman, and thank you so much for listening to this review episode of Waiting in the Sky. I am actually making this the second ever Mega Mini review episode. So if you didn't catch the first one, I actually did a little while back. What that means is instead of just taking a deep dive into one piece of media that I consumed this past week, I am actually going to give you a little bit more of a shallower take on 4 different topics this week. I am super excited about this because there was just a lot going on this week. And so I had a hard time deciding ultimately on what to make the focus of this week's review. And here we go. This is why the Mega Mini format was created, was because I had a hard time deciding way back then what to cover, and I just ran into the same problem again this week with so much going on. But rest assured, I found 4 really interesting pieces of media to dive into this week. And so I hope that you'll stick around and listen to my take on all of them. I'm going to be getting into not really getting too deep into it, like I said, so not really heavy spoiler territory. There might be really light spoilers. I'm going to absolutely avoid like ruining these things for you, of course, but I can't promise I'm not going to trickle in a couple of little mini spoilers here and there. They might not even be considered spoilers to most people, but if you are someone who likes going into these types of things completely fresh and untainted by any type of information that could be in that spoiler zone, just be aware of that. Maybe come back after checking out whatever you're hoping to check out. But I hope that if you clicked on this episode and you are interested in one of these things, that you stick around for all 4. That said, I will include the timestamps in the description. So if you are looking specifically for the Angelyne review, for example, that is going to have a timestamp in the description. You'll click on it there, and you can jump right into that portion of the episode. Like I said, I think these are all pretty interesting subjects for this episode, so I hope that just stick around and listen to all of it. But obviously, no shame if you are here for one thing and one thing only. But before I get into all of that, of course, a little bit of housekeeping off the top. We've been on a roll. I have been super excited about how season 2 of the podcast has been going so far. I am going to be honest. I'm starting to shift gears a little bit. We are in the summer. We are right on the cusp of summer with Memorial Day right around the corner. And so I'm looking ahead at what to do, and I've got some really great topics lined up and looking at getting some fresh voices to come talk about these exciting things this summer as well, and some familiar ones from past episodes into the mix as well. But overall, just a lot that I'm looking forward to in season 2 this summer, and going to also be looking ahead to season 3. So going to be taking a planned break and doing some kind of regular maintenance, some revamping here and there, just to continue to improve the product that we're putting out here on this podcast. So I'm incredibly excited about that. I'll share some more information as we get a little closer and it's a little bit more relevant. But for now, just kind of know that that's on the horizon. And it's mostly, almost entirely, 99.9% great things to be excited about. I definitely am super excited about the direction that we'll be going with the show. So we also had a couple of episodes drop this past week. If you've not yet caught those, highly recommend going back and checking those out. Episode 207 of the show released this past Thursday. We got into a little bit of a conversation about Duke Nukem after the Duke Nukem Forever early build that was leaked earlier last week. And so Richard and I kind of broke down Duke Nukem as a character as well. So some good stuff there. We also did a full-on basically a commentary of the Disney movie Heavyweights starring Ben Stiller. So if you're not familiar, essentially a fat camp movie from the late 90s, I believe. So this is early Ben Stiller. It is available on Disney Plus. If you've not yet seen that movie, highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. It is a favorite of both Richard and myself, which is why we talked about it at great length. So definitely check it out. It's on Disney Plus, and then go back and listen to that commentary on the episode, because it is fantastic, and it's a great time just to enjoy that movie and all of its merits with a couple of big fans. And then, of course, finally, the last piece of that episode is a breakdown, a retrospective of the Assassin's Creed series. So finally got Infernal Griffin, my buddy Isaac, back on the show to actually talk video games as opposed to movies. I kept mentioning it to him that, he's a video game guy. That's how we met, or that's how we've connected, really, over a shared love of video games. But really, we talked about some movies the first two times he appeared on the show. So it was great to have Isaac on talking about Assassin's Creed, such a huge franchise, and one that he and I both really enjoy. And that said, there are some very obvious high points and very obvious low points of the series, and we kind of took that approach to the discussion as well. So highly recommend that conversation if you are a fan of Assassin's Creed, or even if you've fallen off of that franchise at this point. Go back and listen, see maybe what you're missing. I actually hadn't played the two most recent entries, Odyssey and Valhalla. After that conversation with Isaac, I fired up my PS5. I re-downloaded Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I jumped in head first. I did a leap of faith, if you will. So definitely check out that episode. It's great, loaded top to bottom. Before that, last week's review episode is also kind of a unique one, because instead of just a straight up review, I actually did a comparison and review of both versions of Firestarter. So we obviously had the one that released last week, brand new Firestarter 2022 starring Zac Efron, and then we had the original adaptation in 1984 starring Drew Barrymore as a child actress. So very interesting points on both sides of that comparison. It's great if you wanted to get a feel for Firestarter, the new movie, if you were maybe on the fence about diving into that one, or if you just really are interested in the comparison between the two. I think there's a lot of really unique differences that were great to touch on as well. But it's a Stephen King movie. Obviously, there's a ton of Stephen King movies. I think this one is certainly another one, is maybe the best way to put that, and still leave you something to go back to in that episode. So check that one out as well if you haven't. Finally, a really slim glimpse ahead at the next episode of the show. Episode 208 will be dropping not this Thursday, but 1 week from this Thursday. That is June 2nd. It'll officially be the first episode of June. And episode 208, we are going to be talking about two heavy-hitting television shows, that being Amazon's The Boys Season 3. The episode will be dropping before the season 3 premiere, but we will be talking about The Boys to get you primed and ready to go for that season premiere. And of course, we're also going to be talking about Stranger Things. Season 4 is going to be releasing soon this summer as well. And so we are going to get you primed and ready to go for that amazing series on, of course, the Netflix original as well. So likely with some fresh voices on that episode. Stay tuned. I'm super excited. Been having some great conversations with some people that I think are going to bring a ton of passion to those conversations. So super excited across the board for episode 208. With all of that out of the way, it's officially time for Mega Mini Review number 2. Let's kick it off. I am going to start off with Angelyne. I already teased it. I already name dropped it at the beginning. So why not just jump into it? So Angelyne, if you're not familiar, is a limited series, 5 episodes total, about averaging about 45 minutes per episode on Peacock. Peacock is actually great because it is free. So you can watch this for free without having the subscription. You do have to watch ads, but it is free. So if you want to check it out, you're very capable of doing so. You can also pay for a subscription to get limited or no ads at all if you would prefer to do that. But the actual topic of Angelyne is Angelyne. Now, if you're like me, you're not actually familiar with Angelyne. And essentially, the way that she is described is this is the person who was famous for famous for being famous before Paris Hilton, before Kim Kardashian. And so this is a woman, very, you're going to see, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to see a picture of Emmy Rossum portraying Angelyne, who is a blonde, very busty woman who put up a bunch of billboards across LA back in the 1980s, and essentially just launched her name into the stratosphere, at least around California and LA in particular. And so I was actually not familiar with this story at all. Was fully on board with the series just for Emmy Rossum, to be totally honest with you. A little bit of backstory into the life of TJ here. Emmy Rossum has been like my forever lifelong crush, going back to when I was a kid and I watched Genius, the Disney movie about the kid who was so smart that he ended up teaching college level classes, and he loved hockey. And he also wanted to be a normal kid, so he enrolled in high school classes under an alias, and he meets a girl in his class played by Emmy Rossum. And I watched this as a kid, and I'm pretty sure she was my first crush. Most recently, she's very well known for her work as Fiona Gallagher on Shameless. So if you've been hearing me say Emmy Rossum and you're like, maybe that sounds familiar, maybe it doesn't, you would definitely recognize her as Fiona from Shameless. But yeah, I was on board because of her. And honestly, overall, I had a good time with this series. I thought it was a lot of fun. Like I said, it's not a huge time commitment. It's 5 episodes total, 45-minute episodes on average. It really flies by because there's a lot of interesting things here. Let me just say that the way that they frame this story is in a documentary format, but it is all dramatized. So Emmy Rossum is playing this older version of Angelyne, giving an interview to a documentary crew, and then the story is told through her present day voice as well as flashbacks, and it goes all the way back, and it's going all over the place over the span of these 5 episodes. But ultimately, it's kind of just giving you the backstory of this woman who just kind of came out of nowhere, became famous, like I said, because of these billboards, known as the Billboard Queen, and drove around this iconic, pink Corvette, bright pink Corvette. I think the best way to describe her is like she idolized Barbie and Marilyn Monroe. I think that's referenced multiple times throughout this series, and just kind of like the West Coast Dolly Parton to a certain extent, I guess you could say. I think I've also described her as Betty Boop Barbie, is another great way to describe her. So really an interesting character, and I might not even be selling it the best because I would encourage you, if you've not even heard of this show or of this woman, please check out a trailer for it, because I watched one trailer and I was intrigued. So definitely check that out. I think Emmy Rossum does a great job of portraying this character of Angelyne. And I say that fully not knowing the real life person, who is still alive. I believe she's in her 70s now. I think she had some involvement in the series. There's kind of a tease about that at the very end, that I won't spoil that, but it is something to kind of look out for. But I'm pretty sure she did have some involvement on the show in some capacity, but I've not really dug into it too much. But it's broken up. The way that the series is broken up is each episode is kind of taking a glimpse into a different period of her life. And so episode 1 starts off with kind of where things really took off for her, where she, well, not even that, kind of the prequel, the immediate prequel to when things really took off for her. So she is just this LA local woman who is going to bars and is looking to join a band. She is dedicated to becoming famous and believes that she can do so by joining a band, being the front woman, being the quote unquote eye candy is a term used in this episode to describe her role in the band. And so she latches onto a band, kind of takes over ultimately, forms it into her own image, becomes known, gets some notoriety from her role in this band as well. And then it kind of just documents her relationship with the lead guitarist of the band, who she has not really a romantic relationship with, but he would like there to be a romantic relationship. And there's some great stuff here. I'm gonna I wrote down some quotes throughout the series, and I'm gonna just kind of mention those as well. So the crowd is my drug is a quote I had written down here, and she's talking about obviously like they're a punk rock band, and so they're going off in the corner, in a closet, bathroom, whatever the case is, and they are doing drugs. And she's talking to another bandmate about like, well, why aren't you doing that? Well, that's not my thing. Okay, well, why aren't you doing it? And she says the crowd is my drug, and kind of just paints a picture of who this person is, where she just loves the attention. The fame is what she craves, is her addiction ultimately. Another thing here is she also has a quote unquote so what mentality. So her ultimate goal is to be famous. She is very much focused on that. And I will say what's interesting about this character is that she is not like mean like you might be imagining, if she is just completely dedicated to her goal of becoming famous. And so for the most part, she is not a very mean person. She's ultimately not overly concerned what people think about her, as long as they are thinking about her, I think is it in so many words is another sentiment that is also stated in this series. So episode 2 takes the approach of when, like I said, now this is when things are really kicking off for her at this point. And it's about her relationship with the printing, the owner of the printing company, who ultimately prints her billboards for her. And she sells her billboards as, this is not a product. I am doing this to market myself. I'm advertising myself here, which was entirely unique at the time. She says, well, we didn't have to go to the moon, but we did. And so we don't have to put these billboards up, but we can. And I'm going to be the first one to do it. And ultimately, he kind of falls in love with her allure as well. And he invests, quote unquote, in her and puts up all these billboards. And so it kind of documents the way that she builds this following, becomes this local sensation. Like, people talk about seeing her around in her pink Corvette. I almost said pink Cadillac, pink Corvette, which is very important here. And also talks about so the owner of the printing company, played by Martin Freeman, who does a great job here. I really liked what he does. I really like him in most things, to be honest. So I wasn't surprised that I liked his role here. Pretty small in the grand scheme of the series, but does a good job at delivering in this role. Also focuses on his daughter, who is an actress, or was an actress, and kind of the way that Angelyne's relationship with her father impacts Martin Freeman's relationship with his daughter character here. So really interesting the way that they tackled all of that. Episode 3 takes us into the perspective of a fan club president / like a personal assistant of Angelyne's, where she's kind of at the height of her powers at this point. And so we're learning a little bit more about her. She has a run-in with Hugh Hefner. Very interesting. We get a tiny glimpse into her past where, someone from her past shows up. I'm not going to go into that because that's a potential spoiler as well. I think it's really interesting what they do here. Someone from her past where she's very secretive about, really reveals nothing, not her true name or anything about her past. And so we do see someone kind of show up and really impacts her, really kind of makes her lose it a little bit because she is so caught up in her current life and being famous and being Angelyne. Episode 4 talks about the first documentary that was attempted to be made of her by a recent college grad. So, like, a young filmmaker approached her about making a documentary of her life. And then this is the first time you really see her kind of be mean. And it's because she is being difficult, but she's not being difficult to be mean at first. She's just being kind of difficult because that's who she is. And so this young filmmaker is, really trying his best to work with her, but is struggling overall. And eventually, because he's failing to get the help from her that he needs to paint this full picture, starts doing some independent research. And this is when we finally see her kind of be mean for the first time. And I think this is very interesting because she's only being mean because she's trying to protect her story and her image. In her mind, she's worked so hard to create this, iconic image of Angelyne, and this young filmmaker who's doing all this independent research into her past and ultimately finds out who she is, or who she really is, her past life, is putting that in danger and is essentially threatening that aspect of herself. And so that's where she kind of lashes out, and we see a little bit of a legal battle between them play out as well. And then episode 5 kind of puts a bow on things because we see, it's been framed throughout the series that there's a Hollywood Reporter story that ultimately, puts out into the public her story, the story that's teased in episode 4, and we fully see it in episode 5. This is something that actually exists. The Hollywood Reporter does have an article about Angelyne, kind of detailing who she is of the past. And so it gives that perspective and kind of digs into some of the trauma that she experienced, kind of paints a picture of why she would want to distance herself from her past and would want to reinvent herself as this woman. Or I should say, she's not a woman, she's an icon, which is something that she is repeating to herself, kind of, trying to will it into existence in the very beginning. And we also see it at the very end as well. So I really like that they bookended the story that way. But overall, I think the performances are really good. There's a lot of humor in this. Some of it is, very like kind of straight humor. And it's not so much like jokes that are hitting you. It's just the way that the performers are carrying out their business on screen. And so I think it's funny. I think it's interesting. And I think it's there's a little bit more under the surface here as well as you go through the entire series. So I do really recommend this. I had a really good time with it. So if you have any interest whatsoever, if I piqued your interest, I don't think you'll be disappointed in checking it out. At least give the first episode a try. I think the first episode does really paint a good picture of the full series. So give the first episode a try. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But at least give it that much is what I would say. Like I said, streaming on Peacock, you can watch it with a couple of ads for free. So check it out. All right, so moving along to the next topic, and that is going to be Men. So I actually saw this film this past Thursday. I went to an opening night showing of this A24 film. If you are familiar with the studio A24, they have done a lot of really noteworthy movies. Horror in particular has really stood out from this studio. Thinking of Hereditary, Midsommar as kind of the big noteworthy ones, I guess you could say. This kind of falls in line with those films. So if you are someone who really enjoyed those movies or one of those movies, I think you might get a good kick out of Men. This was directed by I man, I am totally blanking on his name now. He was the director of Annihilation, which was the Natalie Portman movie with Oscar Isaac. Very interesting. Alex Garland. Alex Garland. So he definitely puts his stamp on this. If you saw Annihilation, you know that there is some very interesting visuals in throughout that movie, and that's definitely something that he carries into Men here. So let me just give you a quick synopsis of the story, if you're not familiar at all. So essentially, there is a woman who has experienced a trauma with her fiance or husband, I believe, and she is now kind of taking a trip to get away from everything, kind of clear her mind a little bit, and just really kind of reset. So not something totally out of the ordinary, something that would be totally reasonable. If for someone in that situation, if you go through a traumatic experience with your spouse, it makes perfect sense that you would want to take a little bit of time to yourself to kind of reset. Ultimately, there are some very, very heavy themes in this movie, and so I'm gonna kind of get a little spoilery here. Like I said, light spoilers. I don't think this impacts the movie if you go into it, but so if you don't want spoilers for this, I would suggest jumping to the next timestamp, where we're going to be talking about the next topic. However, I'm going to get a little spoilery here. So the trauma that she experiences is her husband threatening to, well, when she tells her husband that she wants a divorce, he is now threatening to kill himself in response if she continues with it. And ultimately, he does end up dead, presumably from a fall off of the top of their apartment building. And that's kind of where I'll leave it at that, as far as that goes. And again, I don't think that really spoils anything. You find that out very early on in the movie. But she's now going to this sort of a I guess the best way is kind of a castle. It does take place in the UK, and so she's kind of on a plot of land off by herself, and it's a nice, house that she's in, but it's a bigger location for just one person to be in. But again, it's her trying to get away from everything. And ultimately, she just starts encountering people, in particular men, that are just so off-putting in a lot of different ways. And it's interesting because, like I said, there is some very heavy messaging here about the ways that men, um, I guess, just affect women. I would say on a daily basis, but ultimately can create trauma for women and pain them in many different ways. And so I think she experiences a lot of different ways that women are regularly haunted. I think haunted is a word that they use at one point in this film. And I think, I'm just going to kind of touch on this. I think there are some interactions with men that are overly friendly, to the point of being uncomfortable. Men playing the victim. I mentioned, her husband in that situation trying to play the victim and flip things around on her. Being sexually exposing themselves or stalking, being hit on and cussed at when rejected is something that happens here. Being a man blaming her and blaming her for issues with other men, and just kind of generally hating her because she's a woman. Her being ignored or dismissed by men, and not being taken seriously. Being ultimately being sexually harassed and assaulted is another example that is used here, and being overpowered and stolen from. Ultimately, I would say these are a lot of ways that women are impacted on a somewhat regular basis across the world. And so that's the messaging here is, there's so many scary things in this world. There's so many scary things you can put on screen. But somehow just putting men and kind of sensationalizing, in some aspects, sensationalizing uh, the way that they interact with women is just as terrifying. And so I think that's what's really most powerful about this movie. Um, I will just say, if you have experienced any sort of trauma, um, this might not be the movie for you. I would maybe read through some reviews that are a little more specific about some of the things that you'd see in this before considering going into it. Because there is a lot. There's absolutely a lot that could be triggering. So I just want to kind of put that out there as well. But ultimately, I thought that this was a very interesting, very well made movie. The final act goes off the rails. Just like none other, and that's probably something you've already seen. So it for the most part is just kind of unsettling throughout, but realistically it just kind of blows up at the end in a very interesting way. A lot of gore, a lot of kind of gruesome effects here as well. So I'll also say, if that's something that you don't really do, be aware of that, because this also might not be for you. But the performances are really well done. The characters that are meant to unsettle you, to be off-putting, really do so in a great way. Even myself as a man felt uncomfortable watching the actions of these men on screen, and so it's very well done, like I said. And I also wanted to make the point, because I noticed as I was watching, there are very few female characters in this movie aside from the main character. But with consistent with the messaging, all of the interactions that she has with the female characters are really positive interactions. Like, you are so used to the interactions with men that are so just uncomfortable is the word I keep using, uncomfortable, unsettling, that it feels incredibly foreign for her to have just like a sort of run of the mill interaction with a female. And that it's just part of one of the things that I really liked about this movie. So it very much might not be for everyone. It is a little heavy handed with the messaging. If you're not on board, or at least open to that type of messaging, then you're probably not going to enjoy this, because it's hard to really take this in at surface level, because it is very much so built on that foundation of that message. But overall, men, I really enjoyed it. I would give this a 4 out of 5 rating overall, and definitely a really good horror movie early in the summer here for you to check out if you're interested. Okay, third up, let's dive into a video game conversation. And that video game is Vampire the Masquerade Swansong. So, if you're not familiar with this franchise, Vampire the Masquerade was an RPG that puts you in the shoes of a vampire in kind of the modern day city, the modern day world, and built out this incredible lore. I actually never played that game, but I know that there's a lot of anticipation for Vampire the Masquerade 2, which I believe is supposed to be coming out later this year. It may have been moved to 2023. I'm not entirely sure about that. However, this Swansong is kind of a spin-off game that just kind of showed up on my radar, to be totally honest with you. I had not even heard of it prior to its release day, and I just kind of happened upon the title. I was familiar with the first game from watching some gameplay videos. The Salt Factory on YouTube, absolutely, I love his content. Definitely check that out. I'll go ahead and include a link to that in the description as well, because in addition to the great the great video that he did on Vampire the Masquerade. He's done amazing videos on a lot of great games as well. So I will definitely include a link down there. But Swansong is different than the main series in that while it is an RPG, it's strictly kind of that choose your own adventure, telltale, don't nod, like Life is Strange type of feel to it. So it's very much focused on that storytelling and that freedom of choice. The RPG elements are all related to your interactions with other characters and the environment, but there's no combat. So it's not fighting through as a vampire. It's manipulating conversations, doing some digging into files and, books, people's notes to kind of dig up the dirt on them and use that against them and to ultimately solve this mystery. And that mystery is there was a unification party that was being hosted by the Boston vampires, and they invited Hartford-based warlocks to kind of unify with them, to have a truce, to be working together. And so they're having this party to celebrate. Before the party really kicks off, the city of Boston goes into a code red. Now, essentially what this means is that all vampires are on lockdown until this is resolved. Because there's been a lot of bloodshed at this party and they need to figure out exactly what's going on. So that's what you're trying to solve. And you're trying to solve this by getting to know all of the characters around you. I should say that you actually play as 3 protagonists in this game. You play as Leisha, and Caleb. So 3 pretty interesting characters from what I can tell so far. Leisha can see into the future. She gets visions, but they're kind of unstable visions. She doesn't have full control over this. So, more like That's So Raven type of thing rather than like the 3-eyed raven. That's great. More That's So Raven, less 3-eyed raven. And that is going to be my clip for Instagram. But what is interesting about her is she also has her young daughter with her, who comes along with her while she's doing a lot of investigation. So I've not finished this game. I am actually still pretty early on. I'm in the second scene, which is kind of like a chapter, would be the best way to describe it. And is another character here. So is a younger vampire who is kind of in a love triangle, at least to start off with. And so that's kind of interesting. And she's also eager to prove herself as, being a vampire who can stand on her own, being a person who can stand on her own without needing her sire. So that's a term of the person who turned you into a vampire, not needing her sire to look out for her. So she really wants to show that she is able to stand on her own. But she's also in the middle of this love triangle between, her current relationship and her past relationship. So is really interesting. I think she's the most blank protagonist of the 3. As far as like her abilities go, I think that she does have she's very strongly opinionated, and so it is fun to play as her. So far I've really enjoyed it as well. And then the final character is Caleb. Caleb is the oldest vampire, one of the oldest vampires in Boston, and he is sort of the old guard. The princes of Boston have come and gone, but he is someone who has been around for all of that. So he is someone who is, he's somewhat trusted for his experience and his knowledge of the world around them, the world of the vampires and the city as a whole. And he is kind of someone who feels a sense of duty as well. So Caleb, it kind of embodies that aspect of a character. And I think that's a really good balance between these 3 characters. They all bring some unique elements to it. You also get to make them, what you would like as far as the RPG elements here. You can focus on dialogue skills. You can focus on physical skills. You can focus on vampiric abilities. those types of things and kind of shape the way that you would like to play. And so there's a lot of creativity at play here that you can kind of make your own. And so this is a game that, I'm just starting out, like I said, but I still think that you're going to have the ability to replay this and take on different play styles, especially as you get later into the game. Like, I can already tell you, you're leveling up pretty slowly, but by the end of the game, you're going to be fully leveled in whatever way you choose. But you could play the game and go a completely different direction. So they give you some preset builds for your characters, or you also have the option to create your own from ground zero. I use the 3 preset builds, but I use them on each different character in the way that I saw fit the most. So you have investigator, jack of all trades, and I'm forgetting what the last one is. It's like veteran or something like that. And so veteran, I definitely felt like that was Caleb. He's someone who's been around, that fit him. Jack of all trades, I went with Leisha. This one I actually think I may have swapped Leisha and MM a little bit, because MM I went with investigator. Investigator is someone who's going to be digging up things, is going to be interacting with objects and the history of them using her abilities. The jack of all trades is someone who is going to have more leveled out skills across the board. And so, like I said, MM being a little bit more of a blank slate in regards to her abilities and skills is maybe a better fit for the jack of all trades. I would probably swap those personally, but definitely read some guides going into it. I didn't, and I kind of wish that I had, because I would have just gone with the create your own and really had a lot of fun with it. Instead, I think I'm gonna have to wait to do that for a second playthrough, because I'm very satisfied with what I've chosen so far. So having a great time with Swansong. From what I have read and seen, there is a lot of impact on the story. It does take some wild swings as well. So super excited to keep playing this game. Visuals, I'll just touch on it, are kind of Mass Effect remastered slash Outer Worldsy. So not going to blow you away by any means, but also not like terrible. The gameplay itself, I think, works well enough. I think there's some little weird quirky things. Like, I'm not a big fan of the UI of the HUD overall. I think there's some confusing elements to it, a little bit hard to navigate until you get the hang of it and you're familiar with it. They use the term opponent when referring to someone that you're interacting with, that you're speaking with, and there's going to be a lot of skill checks in these dialogues. It's all built around that. And so it's interesting that they use this term opponent with someone that you're having a conversation with. And at some point, there is a literal dice roll on screen with whether or not you are successful in your attempt to progress the conversation in a certain way. Very interesting, very, gets political. You get to dig into these existing relationships, a lot of lore. If you're someone that loves to dig into that type of thing, this is a very meaty subject lore wise, whether you have a love of vampires in general, or if you want to kind of dig into this specific world, vampiric world, I think this could be up your alley. So I'm looking forward to continuing playing Swansong, and I would recommend you check it out, or at least check out some gameplay if you're on the fence, but definitely I think worth your time to investigate a little bit. Last but not least, this has been the talk of the town this weekend since its release on Disney Plus. That's right, I'm talking about Chippendale Rescue Rangers, now streaming. So if you're not familiar with this one at all, this is a story of Chippendale, the chipmunks from the Disney Pantheon. Originally the stars of Chippendale Rescue Rangers, the cartoon series. I believe there was 3 seasons of the show. And so this story, it's directed by Akiva Schaffer of The Lonely Island, stars Andy Samberg, also of The Lonely Island, and John Mulaney as Chippendale. But it's absolutely loaded. Like, of course, you've heard of this movie at this point, but absolutely loaded with cameos of actors, and I guess the best way to describe it would be cameos of characters, cartoon characters from across all sorts of media, even ones that you certainly would not expect to show up do show up. So I'm going to try not to spoil too many of those. I want to touch on a couple though that I think are particularly interesting. So Ugly Sonic is hilarious. Obviously stemming from the original design of Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sonic the Hedgehog movie. You would not expect this to show up in a Disney movie, but he does. He's hilarious, voiced by Tim Robinson, who I absolutely love. I think you should leave with Tim Robinson on Netflix. If you've not seen that show, I cannot recommend it enough. It's got a very, very particular brand of humor, but it is so funny. So definitely worth checking out to see if it's up your alley. But he does a great job in this role as Ugly Sonic. Couple of other ones too. I'm a huge Kingdom Hearts fan, so we do get the smallest little Kingdom Hearts reference here. And so keep an eye out for that. We also, Seth Rogen has a great moment in here too. He does voice one of the characters that recurs throughout the movie, but also has a really interesting moment later on in the movie as well. So that's something to look out for. And then Paul Rudd. Everyone loves Paul Rudd. You're going to absolutely enjoy his moment here as well. So a couple of things to look out for while you're watching Rescue Rangers. I think just to give you kind of the quick hit, because if you've not seen it already, I'm sure this is already something on your radar. But it's very much like the kind of Roger Rabbit feel to it, in the way that the cartoon world is interacting with the human world. Although the difference is that they're kind of sprinkled throughout. Like the cartoon characters are just other people that exist in this world alongside real life humans. And so it's a little bit different. And we also get a Roger Rabbit cameo. So I just thought that was a great reference right off the bat. Again, not spoiling anything, because that is right off the bat and great. But I think that the performances are good. There's obviously a lot of great comedic actors in this. I've already mentioned Andy Samberg, John Mulaney, Seth Rogen. Akiva Schaffer, I think, does an amazing job here. One of the funniest, like The Lonely Island as a whole, one of the funniest comedic groups of all time at this point. They've really, I think, cemented themselves at this point. I don't think that's a controversial statement to make by any means. I also think that this movie does a lot of really cool things with animation, because not only do they have all these characters, cartoon characters, making cameo appearances in their own true animation style, but they're also just intermixing the way that these characters look. So the big thing here is that Dale is now a CG character. He had CG surgery, where Chip is still his 2D self. And so I think not quite to the extent that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse kind of pushed the envelope in animation in a very new way. Not quite to that level. I think this movie also does a lot of really unique, exciting things with animation. So I'm excited to see the impact that this has on future movies and projects on film as well. But overall, the story is that the Chip and Dale kind of go their separate ways when their show ends. In this continuity, they are actors on the show. And so they are kind of living the post kind of child star, like, even though they're not children, sort of that post child star life of someone who moves away from the public eye and being on screen like that. And Dale is someone who is kind of still trying to find that. Chip is kind of just moved on overall, and they have to reconnect because someone is kidnapping cartoon characters and bootlegging them, turning them into bootleg characters and then making them perform in bootleg movies. So extremely fun movie overall. It's PG, so not like, a lot of, crude humor or anything like that. There's some moments that adults will catch on to that kids probably won't. And I think some of those gags are absolutely hilarious. But if this movie is not on your radar, definitely it should be, because there's going to be some moments that you are pointing at the screen, you're saying, oh my God, it's so-and-so. And there's going to be moments when you're just laughing in general. So absolutely think you'll have a great time with Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers on Disney Plus. Like I said, streaming now. But hey, that is all 4 of these projects that I have just spent a lot of time with this past week and this past weekend in general. I'm recording this on Sunday, May 22nd. I hope you found something that you maybe weren't familiar with and you're going to jump into, or, maybe you were just more hyped for something that was already on your radar. That's kind of the point of these mega mini reviews. So I hope you're coming away with something great from it. But yeah, hey, thanks for listening. If you listen to one of these, if you listen to all of them, then you're an absolute champ. I appreciate you. Like I said, keep an eye out for future episodes. We're going to have another review next week. We're going to have episode 208 that following Thursday. Super excited about that. And I need to ask you one more thing. If you have not yet, liked, followed, rated, reviewed the show on whatever podcast platform, YouTube, social media across the board, please consider taking the time to do so. It absolutely helps me out a lot. And I can tell you, every time that happens, I am filled with just the most joy. So if you've done that already, thank you so much for helping provide a little bit of joy to me. I sincerely mean it. It does mean a lot. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up this episode, this mega mini review episode. Thank you so much for being here with me, and we will see you next time. Thanks.